So now, leading on from that from Tracy, who actually mentioned the impact that pornography can have on young people's dating relationships, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christina Massey, who is a lecturer in criminal psychology at Canterbury Christ Church University, who will be sharing her research on pornography and exactly that, its impact on young people's relationships and what we need to do to combat that. It's a timely discussion given the current development of the Online Safety Bill, which aims to place a legal requirement on commercial porn sites to implement age verification. Such sites are unfortunately where young people, particularly boys, go to learn about sex. A quote that sums that up perfectly, if we allow that to keep happening, is from the Flipping the Narrative podcast, which I urge you to go and have a look at and to listen. One of their quotes was, "Learning about sex from pornography is like learning to drive by watching Fast and Furious." And on that note, I'll hand over to Christina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So before I start, I just want to do my public health warning, which is that if you are at home listening to this and there are young people around, or perhaps people who maybe are sensitive to certain issues, if you could please put in headphones or mute me, because some of the things in this presentation are not appropriate for some people to hear. And additionally, if you are sensitive to this topic, please feel free to come back in 20 minutes. My presentation is almost exactly 20 minutes, so it'll be safe to return then. But I appreciate that some of these issues are quite sensitive for some people and not appropriate for children. So that said, I'm Christina Massey, and I was part of the team who carried out some work for the government a while ago now, when the Office of the Children's Commissioner wanted a look at pornography and young people. And actually, we were kind of questioning, do young people oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I had shared them. I'm so sorry. I'm on the first slide. You haven't missed anything except for my name. Sorry about that. Can you see that now? Is that shared?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
so you
fine.
can see it.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good. Yes, so the Office of the Children's Commissioner wanted us to kind of look at whether young people were really viewing pornography. Was this happening, or is this just something that a couple of people had mentioned? And their concerns came out of a much larger project that was being carried out at the time, looking at sexual exploitation in gangs and groups. Child sexual exploitation in gangs and groups. And there was repeated concerns from professionals that young people were making comments after perpetrating sexual violence about it being like being in a porn film, or that what had motivated them to commit these particular acts were things that they had seen in pornography. And the police had said that more and more, when they were taking statements from young sexual violence perpetrators, there was some kind of reference to pornography. Or pornography somehow being part and parcel of their sexual understanding. So we went through the existing literature from around the world that looked at young people using pornography or viewing pornography. We originally found 41,000 articles. We had grey literature, so reports from government organisations and charities and so on, but also academic literature. And we did what's called a rapid evidence assessment, which is just a way of filtering through the existing literature. And we found really what at the time I thought was quite shocking results. So we found categorically young people are viewing pornography. That's irrefutable, and it is not an unusual event. And by the time a young person is 16, they will have almost 99% of the time in this country have seen some form of pornography. So this is not just a few children that perhaps are being exposed to it by teenage siblings or something. This is very commonplace. We also found quite concerning results around the effects that it has on a young person to view pornography. So, for example, body image insecurities. So young people feeling that they are physically repulsive, or that they are somehow not normal, because they are comparing themselves to what is often the only other example of naked humans, which comes from pornography, and not understanding that what you see in pornography is not necessarily, real, that people have physical things done to make them look different, and that some pornography is also digitally enhanced. We also found changes in sexual norms as a result of pornography. So what people think is normal sexual behavior coming from what they've seen in pornography, changes in their actual sexual behavior, and I think very importantly, changes in their sexual expectations. Some things it was very difficult to be confident about from the literature, because there are national differences, religious differences, and all sorts of research differences that made it very hard to make very strong assertions about things. But we did have some findings that we were very confident about. Absolutely, irrefutably, young people are accessing and are being exposed to pornography. The difference being, some young people seek out pornography. Some young people have it shown to them, either by a sexual partner who wants to kind of warm them up to the idea of sex, or by an older person wanting to show this to them, or by friends in the playground. We found a huge gender difference in both exposure and access to pornography and attitudes to pornography, with young males seeming to access pornography more readily than females, disclosing that they were exposed to it more often, but also young males talking a lot about using pornography as an education source, that if they wanted to know what a certain thing was, if they heard someone in the playground name a particular sex act, that they would then go and Google that sex act. Which, I mean, makes intuitive sense, because if we want to know how to get to York, we Google how to get there. If we want to know what's on television, we Google it. So young people have grown up in an age of the internet, when any information you want, you seek out at the internet or from the internet. The problem is that the information that young people are getting about sex from pornography is often not healthy or helpful information. We did find, of course, as with everything, that access to pornography increased with age. But the very concerning finding for me around age was that we were finding primary school aged children who had viewed pornography or had been exposed to pornography. And so this isn't something that we can leave until a person is 16, 17, 18, because often by the time they're 10 or 11, they will have viewed pornography. So we have to start addressing the issue of pornography at a much younger age. We made many recommendations to the Home Office, including that there should be statutory relationship and sex education in schools. At the time we made the recommendation, it didn't happen, but it has subsequently happened in most schools, although not in all schools. And we termed it relationship and sex education, because we believed, the team that worked on this project, that it's the relationship element that is most important. And that is because the relationship element is the bit that is not addressed in pornography. So pornography does not have common themes of reciprocity or consent, or, oh, actually, I don't like that, can you stop and let's do something else? That is not a common thing that you would see in pornography. And we felt that to counter the harmful messages from pornography, we need education in schools around things like respect and consent, and consideration for the other human being that you're having sex with. We also felt that there needed to be a campaign to inform parents and professionals about this, because as you may have seen in some of the information that I sent previously, there is a chasm between how many young people are viewing pornography and how many parents think that their child is viewing pornography. And this is a problem. And I think that this means that young people are not getting the conversations from their adults in their lives that they need around what they're seeing. It's very difficult to ever establish causality. It's easy to establish correlation. So what we found in this is that there is a correlation between young people viewing pornography and these shifts in attitudes. We cannot categorically say that young males who watch pornography are going to be more likely to be aggressive towards their partners and so on because of the pornography. It may be that they view violent pornography because they're interested in violent sex. But what we can see from the literature is that there is this shift in behaviours. And we have in this country a national study carried out every 10 years, which looks at sexual behaviour. And what we can see from these massive studies is that sexual behaviour in this country is changing, and sexual behaviour of young people is changing. And these studies that are abbreviated to NATSAL look at large numbers of people, 10,000 participants, and it's very hard, respect to Gillian, it's very hard to get 10,000 participants. They look at people 16 to 44. It's computer assisted interviews, and they carry them out every 10 years. And they ask about sexual behaviour, what people are doing, how often they're doing it, who they're doing it with. And it's all over Britain. And as I say, it's every 10 years. And so what it gives us is a snapshot of British sexual behaviour that we can then compare decade after decade. And what we can certainly identify in these studies is an increase in sexual activity, an increase in the diversity of reported sexual activity, and that there are shifts in behaviours that perhaps previously were less common that are now becoming quite commonplace or the norm. Unfortunately, because these studies are carried out by researchers that were not doing it for my purposes, they don't always break down into the age groups that I would have found the most helpful. So they have NatSal 1, where they didn't break down by age group, but NatSal 3 they did. So we're not exactly comparing like with like here, but in the first study, they found, for example, that 7% of participants in their study stated that they engaged in anal sex. And anal sex is a very common sexual practice in pornography. In NatSal 2, this had gone up to 12%, and in the most recent NatSal study, it was 18.5 in the younger age group. So in that one, they broke down the 16 to 24, and 18.5% of 16 to 24-year-olds were saying that they had anal sex. And I think what this shows us is, if we look back pre-internet, the 1990s NatSal, anal sex is an unusual sexual practice. 93% of people are not doing this. And with the increase of this being a common theme in pornography, we are seeing shifts in sexual practices to make this a much more commonplace sexual activity. I think that there is some resistance sometimes to discussing particular topics because people think, oh, that might make people more likely to do that particular thing, or if we mention pornography, then our young people might start watching pornography. And I think that we need to stop worrying about that, because even back in 2004, when Livingston and Bobber did a huge study of young people aged 9 to 19, they were finding that 58% of young people had seen pornography they'd already viewed it. Only 16% of their parents thought they had, of the same young people, but that we were finding very high levels of pornography use in that very young group of people back in 2004. And since then, with smartphones and iPads and all these new inventions, I would imagine that rate would be much higher. Also, young people are having sex. We can see that from NatSal. We can see that from, other studies of young people's sexual behavior. And they are also having sex with varied partners. So in NatSal, we found almost 20% of young people had more than 10 partners. So young people are engaging in these behaviors, but unfortunately, to some extent, with pornography being their sex education. And as on the back of this finding from NatSal, Marston and Lewis carried out a study in 2015 looking at anal heterosex, so heterosexual young people engaging in anal sex. And when these young people were interviewed and they were asked why this is that they were having anal sex, most of the males certainly cited pornography as the reason for wanting to have anal sex. They acknowledged that anal sex was painful for their partners, that it was risky, and that they often had to coerce their partners into having anal sex. But this was seen amongst their peers as the optimum form of sex to have. You got sort of more kudos amongst your peers for having anal sex than vaginal sex. And very worryingly, in this study, there was a very strong theme that consent was not viewed by these young males as being important. So they would often say, if she says no, just do it anyway and say it slipped in. So they were openly admitting when they knew they were participating in a psychological study, to anal rape. But they were doing that quite unashamedly. And I think also because in pornography, there is often this theme of women saying no, but wanting it really, or women refusing, but if you carry on, they'll actually eventually enjoy it and will orgasm and so on. So this idea that you don't really need consent to engage in certain sexual, or to engage in sex. Another study that comes out of Germany with slightly older participants looked at pornography use and men's desire to engage in violent sexual practices, and found that the more pornography men viewed, the more they would be engaging in these very violent, aggressive and degrading sexual practices. And again, we can't necessarily definitively say that pornography has made them do this, but that there does seem to be a relationship between pornography use increasing and these very degrading, very abusive sexual practices becoming more commonplace. So what we are seeing from the literature is that pornography is informing sexual practices in young people. Pornography is linked to sexual coercion and a kind of pressurizing of often women to engage in practices that they're not comfortable with, but because this is what young males are being told is what they should be doing, or they should be getting, or what is their right. And that pornography is associated with males being dominant in sex acts and sometimes violent during sex acts. Like I say, causality is difficult to establish, but there does seem to be, although it's complex, this relationship between pornography and males feeling that they have a right to access to women's bodies. I carried out a few years ago a very small study because it's very, very hard to access young people if you want to talk about pornography. Schools won't let you near them, of young males. And the results that came out of this were that Some of them had had no sex education. Certain schools don't offer sex education, and others had had sex education that they felt was not what they were looking for from sex education. So there were things like how to put a condom on, or about diseases, but they wanted to actually know what something was. So if somebody said blowjob and they had no clue what that was, they want to know what is a blowjob. And I've actually done this myself, where I've looked online for a description, a usable description of something like blowjob, and you can find it. Brooke do have some, but it's a lot of searching. But what will be far more prevalent on the internet if you Google a sex act is huge numbers, literally millions. I'm not exaggerating when I say millions of websites offering you pornography. And so my concern is, if we do not tell young people the information that they want to know in a way that is healthy and helpful, and about equality and respect, they will go where we all go for most of our information, which is the internet, and they will get unhelpful information. They will get sexist information. They will get information that is permissive of things like rape and violence, and abuse towards women. And so when I was asked to speak today, I was so pleased to know about this computer game, because I think it is what young people were telling us they want. They want young person centric education that is unembarrassed, that is not, maybe a teacher who doesn't even want to be doing it but's been told it's part of her role, that they can access, that they can find out what they need to know, but in a way that's going to give them information that is not about harmful sexual practices. So I think that this is a really wonderful step in the right direction, around educating young people to have healthy sexual lives, and where they don't have to get unhelpful sexual information. So that report there is the original report we wrote for the Children's Commissioner. It's quite old now, but I think very little of the information in there has really changed, and it has our findings from our literature review, and also my contact details are there as well, if anybody's had any questions that they don't want to ask in the forum in a moment. But thank you very much, and I'm sorry about my slide gaffu at the beginning.
It wouldn't be an online conference without something going wrong, would it? So it's
At least my
absolutely.
doorbell didn't ring.
Or the food delivery or something. Yes, I know. But thank you so much for that, Christina. People may want to contact you outside of this. I think people have just been listening intently, as we don't spend enough time in forums talking about the impact of pornography on young people. And so I'd just like to thank you, because I think you've given us plenty to think about and have shown how critical it is for those who educate young people that we must deliver effective, realistic relationship and sex education. And as you've noted, now that we have the curriculum alongside the game, it does cover the things that you've been talking beautifully about the need to talk about respect and consent, gender inequalities and what that looks like and why, and to really address some of the realities that are happening for young people. So thank you. The context is fabulous. So thank you so much for your time.